Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Spirituality Out Loud podcast. I'm Leslie Seidel, and today I have Alisoun Mackenzie. Alisoun is the compassionate business mentor, speaker, and author. She is on a mission to empower business owners and entrepreneurs to grow profitable businesses that make a difference in the world. She does this through her books, speaking at events, and working with clients around the world. Hi, Alisoun.
Hi, Leslie. Thanks very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm very excited to hear your story. And we start at the beginning. So what were you raised with? Were you raised with religion? Were you raised with spirituality? And how did it land for you? What was your opinion of that?
Yeah. Well, I actually, when I was younger, it was completely neutral, I would say. As in, my family didn't go to church or are not religious in any way. But by the same token, there was never any negative messages communicated to me either. So my experience of spirituality or religion was none other than at school. We would learn about Christmas and Easter and Jesus Christ being brought up in a Christian country, a predominantly Christian country, and I learnt it through school. I would go to church occasionally through school and the brownies and the guides, but that was as far literally as it went. But I think when I was about 9 or 10, I can remember choosing to go to Sunday school. I have no idea why, because I do remember also trying to get out of going to church at any time with the school and guides and brownies. And I used to say I was allergic to it. It was actually the mats I thought were really uncomfortable that we had to sit on. And I really, for the life of me, I was like, this white-haired man that they're calling God, he doesn't seem very kind and nice. He seems to just tell them all off. And I just couldn't get it. I was like, why?
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, and I think it was probably to do with friends that went to Sunday school, and I think I wanted to be included. So I can remember opting in, but only for a very short period of time. And then, if I'm perfectly honest, there wasn't much other than, I suppose, for us being in the UK, we had the IRA and the Northern Southern Ireland conflict going on that did affect us on mainland UK as well, a lot with the bombs and things that were going off. But I just think I grew up not thinking about religion too much, positively or negatively, and certainly had no concept of what the word spirituality meant, other than I thought it was religion. And I can remember I went off in 91. I went off backpacking around the world. And I can remember, I know that you've done some traveling too, and I mean, I've spent years now backpacking in different times of my life. And what surprised me more recently was I had a friend coming up. I came up and stayed, and we hadn't seen each other pretty much since we'd been away backpacking, traveling around Australia in 91. And I'd written even journals, so I got them out while she was with me, and I was like, wow, I meditated every night. Really? I did that in 91. What on earth got me to do that? But it was more of a practical thing that I would do to put myself into a good emotional place. I didn't have that concept of spiritual awareness at all. The first time I can remember really thinking about it, and obviously you can't not be touched by the different cultures, and I got interested in things like, I love the culture in Bali, my favorite place in the world. I know you've been there. I know I saw your stuff.
Yes.
That's just my favorite place in the world. I got curious about all sorts of different religions, and we'd travel around temples, and I loved all of that piece, but again, I didn't feel it was me. And then, when was it now? It would have been about 2000. I started on my journey as a coach and therapist, is what I trained in originally when I was in business. And I can remember it was with Coach U, and they had 36 modules we had to do. And you had 12 compulsory and 24 electives. And one of the compulsory at that point was spirituality. And I can remember thinking, you've got to be kidding me. And I mean, it was the last one I did. And it literally was, God, if I have to do this, I will do it. And I did it. And I can remember on that very first call just going, wow. I had it so wrong. I thought that spirituality was this white-haired God that told us all what we weren't allowed to do. And I had no idea what spirituality was. And that's the first time I can remember. And I would have been in my 30s, you know. And it was the first time I really actually thought about what it all meant to me. So a long story, but that was really maybe the first time when I had that awakening. And now, yes, I mean, I would describe myself as a spiritual person completely, but it was an interesting journey.
Well, yeah. So you had information about it, right? But it wasn't something that called to you when you were young. And then even meditation was more of a physical act, right? Like that's how it sounds to me, like a way to relax before bed, a way to calm yourself, like a practical thing, not a connection to something bigger, not a...
Oh God, no, not the connection piece. Definitely. I mean, no way would I have ever entertained that at that stage in my life, you know?
And so then you have to do it. You're not seeking it out, which is unusual, right? You have no other choice, and you go to this thing that you want. And to get what you want, you have to go through this piece. And it awakens something in you. Do you remember what about it awakened something? Or
I think as you ask that, what comes to mind is just connection, because it kind of made what I thought when I was younger make sense. Because now, of course, it shifted my perception of what religion is too, and what phrases such as God. I mean, I would never... Usually that wouldn't enter into my vocabulary. I understand what it now means now from a spiritual perspective. But I think it helped me understand that just because I'd heard certain messages about religion, that wasn't what they were all about. And that wasn't what defined spirituality, that we could have faith, we could be connected. And I felt like it actually all made sense, and that my resistance was actually more to the resistance to the particular probably churches that I was being taken to and the particular messages I was hearing, rather than connection. So I suppose in a way it almost made me feel whole, that it was like, right, okay, I'm not fighting against something, it's just what I was presented with didn't make sense. Now I know why it didn't make sense, and that's better now.
it's really beautiful, because I think that so many people have this resistance to churches, and they get mad at churches and all of these things. But what I hear is, you know, that there's a shadow side to everything. There's a shadow side to spirituality. There's a shadow side to the coaching. There's shadow side to anything that humanity gets involved in. And right. And so you resisted that shadow and that message that these certain particular churches and this wonderful module, I'd love to see this, right? That now opened up. I mean, that's a huge shift.
It was a massive shift, and it was at a very conscious level. I mean, I was learning it, you know, it was, even though it was quite a number of years ago now, it was online, and it was that, wow, just being told something different, going, oh gosh, I get it now. I totally get it. And of course, now I would see, I still love going into all the different temples and experiencing different things, but I see faith and spirituality as being completely neutral and nothing to do with religion, but more to do with us as human beings and connection. And for some people, if they want to, taking that into their religious practices.
There's this, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's this line that says, inside every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. And I like that, like, no matter what your path is, right? No matter where you're entering this space, it's already there. And so like spirituality and faith, and then there's structures, right? You can learn about Islam, and you can learn about Christianity, and you can learn about, and that's a structure to enter into this thing that already is existing in you.
Yes, I like that, because actually I mean, is part of it about telling stories to bring alive what is already there? I mean, I talk about love, that when we are born, before we are born, all we are is an energy of love. When we are in the womb, we are just love. When we are born, we're love. All the way through life, our energy force is love and connection, and it's within us, it is us, it's all around us. And some people may call that God. Some people may call that source. Some people may call that the universe. I see them now as all being the same thing. We just all attach different labels to how we tell ourselves and others the stories around it.
Yeah. So, so now your mind gets blown, right? So what do you do with that? Do you go seeking? Do you just start noticing your other, like, what happens next after that?
I guess I started going on more and more workshops and courses that I would never have gone on before. My ex-husband started thinking I had gone mad. I mean, I hadn't turned into any kind of spiritual idiot, that was trying to push it down his throat, but I was just starting to have conversations and ask myself things and tell him about, I'd come back from a course and tell him about something I'd experienced, and he would just say, "You've just gone mad. I don't know what you're on." I mean, literally, his conversations were quite attacking towards me. So, but it was too strong. It was, the connection was too strong. I liked what I was hearing. I loved what I was experiencing. I really liked the people I was meeting. And it was the start of me really stepping into a whole other world that now I could never be without. And I do remember, it was funny actually, because I remember when I was married to my first husband, I don't collect them. I'm on marriage number 2. I call the first one practice husband. And I do remember at one point, something tragic, very tragic had happened within the family. And I can remember lending his mum, Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your Life. And I can remember her giving it back to me and saying, "Alison, that's quite a spiritual book. I didn't think you would like it." And I thought, gosh, that's interesting, because when I read it, I would never have used the word spiritual. Yes. I mean, I just took it as faith. At that point, I just took it as a series of techniques. I mean, it was, in terms, do you know what I mean? It was, before I'd read it, it was not, I was just like, oh, I really like, I mean, I loved Louise Hay, adored herself. I trained to be one of her people, I went on and did all this stuff, but I still would never have, in my early in my early journey, when I'd very first read the book, I never thought it was spiritual. I mean, now, not even years down the line, a couple of years after that, I was like, oh, maybe, right. But I hadn't read it as that, because because my definition of spirituality was religion. It was too complete. They weren't marrying up. But that was interesting. But then, of course, not surprisingly, and for other reasons, that practice marriage fell apart, and I was allowed to play and explore and be me. And that was wonderful. And very quickly did meet my current husband, who would never describe himself as spiritual. However, is completely supportive of who I am and the conversations I want to have. So all is good.
Yeah. It's so interesting, because my experience of people who are religious, or a lot of this stuff where everything is not practical. It's on Sundays only. It happens in church. It happens in this prescribed thing. And so then you come at this, not even holding the bigger picture, just saying like, this is just like an exercise program I need to do, right? Like eat less and I will lose weight, and just study Louise Hayes and I will get I will get the results. And it's so interesting. Like I'm dying to go back and look at one of her books, and in this, like in that vein, right? In this idea of this is just a practical thing. And I couldn't even, it's so interesting to me.
Well, the funny thing, when I met my my current husband, who is going to remain my husband, I mean, I'm not planning another one. When I met my husband, very, very early on, because of the experience I'd had, because I was going through that, that journey, and then my first marriage had fallen apart, I was very clear that the person, I can remember saying that ideally I wanted to meet somebody who was spiritual, but I was open to not ruling out, because I thought, well, there might be other people like me who do all this stuff and just don't realize they're spiritual. So I didn't want to, do you know what I mean? I didn't want to just label it as, I'm only going to date you if you're spiritual. And so I can remember we were only on about date number 3, And I can remember he was sitting helping me get prepared for a conference I was speaking at. And I was saying, look, there's a few things I need to tell you. You need to understand how I live my life. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, what I do is if I want something to happen for me or other people, I set an intention. And I set the intention. And then what usually happens is that wherever I say I would like tends to happen a lot of the time. And I live my life by signs, and I follow these signs, and that's how I live my life, and opportunities come to me that way. And he sort of looked at me. He runs a nuclear power station, engineer, non-spiritual, okay, but scientific and logic is good. And he's looking at me, and he was just going, right, okay, well, I don't really get what you're saying, but I'm not going to mock you for it. I will listen. He's an intelligent guy. And I can remember we went out for dinner, and we were sitting in a pub in Edinburgh, and it had a glass conservatory, and we were talking, even though it was early on, we were talking about, wouldn't it be so great if we could just get cheap flights from Edinburgh to Geneva to go skiing for the weekend? And it was before you could get a lot of cheap flights, which we now have here. And he said, well, yeah, why don't we look it up when we get back? And I'm like, no, we'll let's just park that, set the intention, see what happens. Well, it was only about half an hour later. His face went pure white, and I'm like, what is it? And he said, is that what you mean by one of your signs? And I turned round, and there was this bus had stopped right outside the pub, and it said, flights, www.flyglobespan, Edinburgh, Geneva, $25.99. And he said, is that a sign? And I just went, yep. If you want to go out with me, you're going to have to get used to that, because that's how it works.
Yeah.
But he's great because he challenges me scientifically. So I will say, I test anything spiritual on him scientifically quite a lot. So I will say to him something like, is it true that you and I are physical? We're just energy, we're molecules, we're atoms, we're molecules, we're all these tiny protons, whatever you call them when you get smaller and smaller down a microscope. Yes. So we're all just a massive vibrating energy. Yes. And that table and that chair is also just vibrating energy. Yes. So could it possibly be true that when I change what I think, I have an effect on that chair? And that chair might be a living entity? And he'll go, scientifically, that may be true. So it's that kind of conversation. So we have the spiritual come science. He is definitely the science, and I am more the spiritual, but we bring them together.
Well, it's so beautiful. I just started reading a book, which is one of her first books, about synchronicity and Tao. And it's this beautiful thing. And I've just started reading it. And in the beginning, it said, these mystics in these third world countries who have been sitting here meditating for decades, right, know that we are all connected. We are all connected.
That's
right?
That's totally
and
right.
They know that how we are all connected. And then finally science has come along and said, oh yeah, just particle theory, and we're all connected. You know what I mean? And science has now taken their scientific approach and spent all of these decades to find out exactly what the mystics have known this entire time.
That's right.
So they're coming together. And my undergrad was in science, and I like science. I like the illusion of knowing, right? The illusion of concrete. This is true. I've proven this is true. And I hold both of those. So I think I think it's a really great union and fun, right? He stretches you, you stretch him. Fun.
Yeah, I mean, he's been great because, I'll come and say stuff and he'll question me and he'll chat and I'll be like, right, okay, this is really good. Because actually, and when I wrote my first book, I wanted to make sure I put a lot of science in for the people who were maybe more skeptical about some of the things I was talking about in that. And I think part of that came from skeptical friends, but also those conversations with him that actually, for some people, it's really important to hear the science first before they're willing to believe in something. For others, we can just go on the feeling or the intuition or the connection we get. But for others, it's another route in.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this conversation, not just with you, but with everyone, of this is for everybody. You could be atheist and have this conversation. You could have,
Totally.
and let's just start the conversation and listen to people's path.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So one of my new favorite questions, and we had kind of talked about it, which is, what is the strangest situation or experience you've had in your seeking of a spiritual life, if you have had any?
Yeah, well, I mean, continuing, I suppose, on the quest of just trust it. I mean, I am very much somebody that I just trust that everything happens for a reason, and I follow the signs. And following one of these signs a few years ago took me to Rwanda. And I was looking for an experience where I could give and make use of my skills at that point as a therapist, but also continue to travel and help young people. And so I ended up at the top of a mountain in Rwanda with young genocide survivors. And that was an experience which I thought was actually going to be a one-off experience, but I mean, when I got there, I mean, my heart just broke open with love at a whole other level when I heard the stories of these poor young people who had been orphaned during the genocide, had witnessed and experienced the worst things that we could ever experience and see as human beings. And the way that they held faith. So I would say that they would still, they would use, like, we would start every day with singing and dancing round literally a bucket and sticks. As the minibus drove up the mountain, it was a 2-hour journey to the top of this mountain, and they'd be beating the drum with the sticks, and they'd be singing African songs, and then we'd arrive, and they'd be so excited we'd got to the top, and they'd be like, "Oh my God, you got here safely," because people do die falling off the sides of the mountain. And regularly, almost regularly, we'd always start with a check-in and say, well, how are you today? And regularly somebody in their family had died or something would have happened. So they were so grateful to us for every day venturing up this mountain to go and be with them. And we would start with these, this drumbeat and the singing and the dancing, and then we would go into prayer. And prayer was all about, they would say to prayer, and they would say the prayer to whether or not it's the same God or a very similar God to the God that I'd experienced when I was young. So I was like, right, okay, this is fascinating, because I just need to reframe this. This is actually, for me, is about connection. And we as we do when we are looking to communicate and connect with anybody, it's about stripping our message from the terminology we might use and putting it into their terminology. So I was like, right, okay, so that's prayer to them. To me, it's meditation. That's fine. And it really opened my heart to see the capacity of human beings to survive. And the messages, the insights I got from them were incredible. So things like, I would say to them, how have you got through the last few years, having seen all your family murdered, being a child growing up in Rwanda by yourself? What's kept you going? What kept you going through those really horrible, times? I mean, they didn't have many good times at all, And they would say things like, God spared me. I have a purpose. And my role is to share the light in this world. And you'd be just like, whoa, what is that? And when you see, there was one little boy, Matthew, who he lived at the top of this mountain in Rwanda. In a family, he'd lost his mum. He'd only just survived the genocide. Many of the people in his community, many of his friends and family were killed. As a very young boy, he remembers that. And he decided that his way of a better life was to get an education. Now, how this little boy, living in a mud hut at the top of a mountain, who'd never seen a phone, never seen a telly, never seen films. Our children in the Western world, even if they've not had money, they'll have walked past a shop and seen a TV screen and seen what another life could be like. But this little boy walked for 2 hours every single day to school, which was in an orphanage, and he'd only have a bowl of rice a day to eat. Sometimes they couldn't afford to pay for him to go to school. Literally, he would stand outside and listen. And I thought, well, what is it how did that boy have that wisdom to know and have the faith that if they kept doing this, he'd create a better life. And there were so many stories like that. I mean, he's one of the people that we worked with closely with for years and years and years. And there's been a film made about that project and the work that we did. And he's one of the main people because he went on and completely transformed his life. But it did get me to question that piece of what is it within us that gives us the strength, and particularly for people who have not been given the physical opportunity to see things differently. But then the other thing that really struck me there was just how religious they still all were. And this isn't being, I totally respect where they are with things, but during the genocide, so many of their priests rounded people up into churches and invited the people in to massacre them. And to then see that they were still holding these people in the same esteem as, now, I still don't quite get it, but I'm also open to, I've seen how hearts can heal. I've seen how we've been able to help these people through the trauma healing we did, forgive the people that committed the crimes, and the capacity of us as human beings. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but these have probably been times when it's really tested me and got me to go deeper into what spirituality is about and what religion and the just how far faith can actually help us get through really challenging times.
The story is so touching. And both that you are courageous enough to hold that space, to go into that space and say, okay, I will sit here and witness. Because for me, I think the witnessing is so vital. And
totally.
Right? And I used to do grief work, and people would always go like, how do you do grief work? Oh my God. And to hold that space, I get to witness. That's my job. Like, I'm witnessing your love and your pain, and that's the healing that occurs. And it just, the profoundness of how this little boy could have greater faith than me, right? And be more courageous in his actions than I have ever had to be or may ever will, and I have a hard time forgiving the guy who cuts me off in traffic, right? And
yeah,
and it just and I don't want to go to this place of shame. I don't want to do that. That's not helpful. But to hold that, like, this is he is the ideal I want. He is the place I want to get to, right? To hold that in my heart, and if he can do it, I can do it, right?
Yeah.
And to live in that forgiveness.
And it's bizarre because when we're there, literally, I can't even begin to tell you the number of, there's no other word for it, miracles that just happen. And I'm absolutely convinced that it's because when we're there, one of our volunteers said, Alison, I can't believe the love that oozes from this group of genocide survivors. And literally, because what we're doing is the vision is you neutralize the same emotions that cause terrorism in the world. You neutralize them, replace them with love. And she just came in and said, they're just oozing so much love. And I'm sure that it's because literally the love resonance when we're over there, whether or not that's energy or the physical, whatever type of energy you want to call that, literally miracles happen when we are there, and things that we would never have imagined just start to all come together. And that's that connection thing happening again. We get philanthropists from America just phoning us and saying, here's some money, just there because they've heard about something that happened with us, the day before, and crazy stuff. And I'm sure it's the resonance of love that we're all in, and that natural energy source that we go back into, because you also can only, I love the word that you used, all we can do is witness and be there and give them the space. And when we do that with love, kindness, and compassion in your hearts, that is what is the healing forces. And as you've got metaphysicists all searching in the quest for, what's that missing particle that holds the universe together, the scientific universe together. Go and ask a Tibetan monk and he'll just say it's compassion. And actually, if you look at the energy vibration of compassion and what's going on, it's just, it comes back to what you said earlier. It's
Yeah.
about love and the
Yeah.
resonance of love and what happens when we're in that place.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, um, thank you so much for sharing your time and your amazing story. Um, so I will put a link to if someone wants to support your work. Is there a place for them to support your work?
I can give you the link I'll give you the link to the charity that I go out with, although
Perfect.
we're not going out anymore to Rwanda.
Mm-hmm.
There's other work being done now. Currently, the next project is actually with Indigenous people and refugees in Australia.
Nice.
And I'm going to get involved in doing some work probably with a charity in Bali, actually.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah. So I'm going to do some stuff around there. So I can give you some links. That'll be perfect.
Yeah. And so that'll be on coachleslie.com/podcast. And I also just want to say, although you never mentioned this as part of your spiritual life, what you told me, everything you said was service. How you are being of service in the world. And you never mentioned like this is part of your work, right? And you just told the story of it, of I go and be of service. I show up and be of service, and how vital that is to your path. I mean, is that true for you?
Totally. I think my core motivator is to make a difference. I just want to make a difference. And I think that also helped me realize that when it comes to running a business, and you and I both run a business, and that it is about being of service, and when we can focus on really having as much impact as we possibly can, but being kind to ourselves as well. So it is that balance of making a difference to ourselves and making a difference to others, so that we look after ourselves and so that we are sustainable, which is another of the things we teach in Africa. That is a more joyful and organic way to allow our businesses, careers, lives to unfold. And for me, the work I've done in Rwanda has completely changed the whole nature of my business now because of all that giving. So yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing your time with me and your amazing story and your path. And yes, I hope that I can't wait to hear what happens next for you. Like, you're someone I want to witness. Like, I'm like, oh, I wonder what she's going to do next. You really go big, it sounds. You're not.
Oh, I've got a big vision. Yeah.
Nice.
That's a whole other conversation we could have.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Leslie. And thank you to everybody who's listening and watching this as well.
Absolutely.